Santa Maria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, China. There's a new 5-year plan in place for the world's second biggest economy, but it all feels a bit contradictory. Just how is China promising its 1.3 billion people more prosperity while growth slows and reforms are needed? We'll take a look at how China's one-party system has one big challenge ahead. Also this week, solar energy. In hot climates like the Middle East and Africa, it just makes sense. And it's apparently getting cheaper too. We find out about the real impact of one installation in South Africa and why solar is such a big part of the future of energy dependence. And are we overlooking a big way to bridge the development gap between Africa and the rest of the world? We'll learn about investment in science and mathematics education and join the hunt for Africa's Einstein. Economic prosperity requires forward planning. That makes sense, right? And in China, they've got that sort of planning down to a fine and formalized art. For the 13th time, China's ruling Communist Party's unveiled its 5-year plan, this one covering 2016 to 2020. But what a different sort of China it is now. Premier Li Keqiang still says the economy can grow at 6.5% to 7%, but there are also plans for job cuts and reforms as China tries to slowly turn its export-driven economy into a domestic one. All in all, it is crunch time for the Chinese economy and its one-party system. Adrian Brown starts us off this week from Beijing.
It's not a place for surprises or displays of dissent. As always, this was a tightly controlled political gathering, where delegates once more rubber-stamped decisions made in private by the leadership. A leadership that continues to insist all is well with China's economy.
We are full of confidence in the long-term good prospects of the economy. As long as we stick to reform and opening up, China's economy will not see a hard landing.
The Prime Minister holds one media conference a year. Selected journalists get to ask questions vetted in advance. On this occasion, most concern the economy. Reform, he said, would mean having to shut down more inefficient state-owned industries, a sensitive subject.
We will press ahead to reduce capacity, but we must ensure that the rice bowls of the workers are still there, or we must give them new rice bowls.
In other words, the government is still hesitating about how hard to wield the axe. It worries that widespread redundancies in the steel and mining sectors could lead to unrest, as happened in the northeast of the country earlier this week. The Hong Kong-based China Labour Bulletin monitors industrial unrest in China and says laid-off workers are becoming more emboldened.
Many of them have been working for 10 years, 20 years, and they are entitled to quite substantial severance pay. If they don't get that, then there is a danger that there will be more protests across the whole country.
The Prime Minister says he's set aside $20 billion to help workers who've been made redundant, promising more money if it's needed. The National People's Congress won't convene for another year, a year that China's Premier says will be a difficult one, especially for miners and steelworkers. Adrian Brown, Al Jazeera, Beijing.
So what have we learnt here? China's leaders are trying to highlight the positives of a slowing economy, but also seem to be well aware of the difficult transition they are overseeing. And of course, not just for them, the IMF estimates China will account for 18% of world economic activity this year. So how it manages this shift from manufacturing to services is crucial. Let's talk to our guest about all of this. Dan Luo is joining us, Assistant Professor of Economics at the Nottingham University in the UK. Dan, thanks for your time. We've got this latest 5-year plan now, and obviously Premier Li Keqiang's job is to reassure China that everything is going to be okay. Do you think he did a good enough job of that, considering we are still looking at the slowest growth in China in 25 years?
Yes, it's no doubt that we're looking at the slowest growth rate. In particular, last year, the growth rate of the GDP was just 6.9%, and it's the slowest during the past 20 years. However, I think this is everything as expected. So China is slowing down, and it's trying to transform its economic structure to be more sustainable and to be more healthy. So I think Li Keqiang is actually doing a good job, but however, it may not fully reach the expectation of the rest of the world, but actually China is moving on gradually in terms of finishing its comprehensive reform. And I think it would be no problem for China to achieve the 6.5% growth target within the next 5 years. And by that time, by 2020, China should become a generally moderately prosperous society. That's what we expected.
So is that the restructuring that he talks about? Because China has acknowledged that there does need to be a restructuring of the economy in different sectors, not just this whole domestic economy idea. Can you tell us a bit more about some of those changes?
Of course, previously you know that for the Chinese economy, it is always investment-led and export-led. So for that type of growth model, it could not be sustained for an extremely long-term period. So basically, China have to restructure its economy to be more sustainable, so to be more healthy and to be more environmental friendly. So that's why China is trying hard to transform its investment-led economy into a service-based economy. So last year, actually, that's the first time for the service sector, it is contributes to more than 0.5% of the GDP growth. And in the future, we expect that China could have a more healthy and well-developed service industry to contribute more to its overall GDP growth.
And what about externally, Dan? As we know, the rest of the world does need to look to China and feel confident about it because, you know, as we've seen previously, there were the stock market fluctuations, there are the high levels of debt in China as well, and that worries other economies. Is there enough in this plan to calm the rest of the world and show China, or show that China can manage its slowdown?
Actually, for China, it is managing its reform gradually, and that was what has been done by China over the past 5 years, I think, after the financial crisis. For the stock market bubble last year, actually that was not fully expected, and because China is experiencing its fast transitional period, so for its financial sector, it has not yet fully reformed. So we may see some additional volatilities in the financial sector. So that's why China has actually speed up its reform in the financial sector in recent years. So for example, we have the removal of the cap of the lending rate in 2014, and we also have the insurance deposit system for the whole financial sector. So in the future, we do expect that our financial sector could become healthier and could contribute more to the sustainable growth of the Chinese economy. And in terms of the rest of the world, China's export and also import is very important for the rest of the world. However, it only contributes to about 10% of the rest of the world of the international trade. But for the US and the Eurozone, they actually contribute for nearly 50% of the overall international trade. So even China slowing down, it will impact the rest of the world, but will not impact that significantly as what has been expected by the rest of the world.
Can I just ask you a final question about these 5-year plans? Because this is the 13th time that China has put out such a plan, and it outlines its theories, it sets out its goals, but in the end, it's not really accountable to anyone because, of course, we've got this one-party system in China. You know, the government, the party, lays out the ideas and says, this is what we'll do. But if it doesn't work, it's not actually accountable to the people. I start to wonder, can China really carry on like that as its population and its influence grows?
For China, actually, it has this kind of one-party leadership structure. And it works well in China because we are not well developed. We are still a developing country. So basically, we need a very hard and a very strong leadership. So we haven't got that kind of multi-parties in the Western countries. And for this particular one-party structure, it worked very well in China at the moment, in particular during this transitional period, because once the center have a decision, it could be implemented quickly by the rest of the country. So this will speed up our reform process and make sure that the local area will respond quickly to the central decisions. So in this way, actually, the reform could be carried out more smoothly and quickly, and it will, I think, contribute to the overall growth of the Chinese economy in the future.
Dan Lo from Nottingham University, good to get your thoughts. Thanks for joining us. But you know, even though there's all this concern about weakness in the Chinese economy, Chinese companies have been going on a record spending spree. Last year, Chinese foreign deals hit a record $108 billion, according to data provider D-Logic. This year, it's already at $102 billion. For example, there's China National Chemicals' proposed $43 billion takeover of Swiss agribusiness Syngenta. Just this week, the insurance giant Anbang launched a $13 billion bid for Starwood Hotels. That's a name behind brands like Sheraton and St. Regis. If it happens, the deal will be China's biggest purchase of a US company. But the interesting thing here is that Chinese companies need to get enough foreign exchange to pay for the takeovers, and that's something the government keeps a very close eye on. So given this recent volume of deals, it seems the Chinese government might just approve of this foreign buying spree. We've also got news about a foreign company in China, and this is building on what we told you last week about data security. Apple is under the US Justice Department's microscope, which has accused it of making special deals with the Chinese government to protect its business interests there. Remember, China is Apple's fastest growing market. It accounts for a quarter of revenue, with sales of $18 billion last quarter alone. Apple says the China question is a cheap shot because, of course, the FBI isn't getting any cooperation from Apple in trying to unlock that iPhone belonging to the San Bernardino shooter. Apple defended its dealings with governments around the world, though it did stop short of saying data had never been accessible by any foreign government. And just finally on China, I had an interesting discussion this week about doing business there with the CEO of luxury watchmaker Tag Heuer. We're going to bring you that full interview next week when we discuss, among other things, the Swiss currency and also the world of traditional versus tech watches. But right now, here's what Jean-Claude Bivet had to say about how his company is taking on the challenges in China.
The mood is today consolidating, I would say, in China. China has done the consolidation, in my opinion. And China, it will take 6 or 9 or 12 months, but China will recover. That's why we are at the moment investing heavily in China, because we know the China market will be back. And now is maybe a good moment to invest when less people are investing in China. And you should always be contrarian, you know? You should be contrarian on the stock market, but you should also be contrarian in your business. And that's why, at the moment, we do a lot of efforts, we do a lot of investment in China to take advantage that many people are shifting their efforts from China to other countries, and we, on the contrary, we are going now to China.
And still ahead on Counting the Cost, Paraguay, the South American country you don't hear a lot about. A little later, we speak to Paraguay's foreign minister about driving economic growth in a country landlocked by 2 other agricultural giants. Right now, though, renewable energy and its economic benefits. See, we all know the environmental need for them, but a new report from the International Renewable Energy Agency is now saying if we double the share of clean energy in the mix right now, we would create more jobs and boost the global economy. The research recommends boosting our reliance on renewables such as solar and wind to 36% by the year 2030. And by doing that, it calculates a saving of up to $4.2 trillion a year worldwide. The agency also says achieving that doubling is not only feasible, it's cheaper than not doing so. It would also all contribute to that target of limiting the global temperature increase to less than 2 degrees Celsius. That was, of course, agreed at the COP summit in Paris last year. But let's look more at those economic benefits because, well, the bottom line will always be a factor in any new technology. Solar technology was often seen as prohibitively expensive, but according to some in the business, that is changing. Let's go to South Africa's Northern Cape region now, speak to Rajit Nanda from Aquapower. It's a Saudi company, but in this case creating solar projects in Africa. Rajit, it seems for a long time solar power was pushed for environmental reasons. It was a better choice for the environment, but now it also seems more of a financial question, even with the price of oil being as low as it is now.
Yeah, look, the genesis of solar energy has been always predicated around environmental reasons. But the way the cost of producing electricity from solar has evolved over these last few years, particularly in the last half a decade, solar power has managed to demonstrate itself to be same as grid parity, which means it has now demonstrated itself to be a low-cost, competitive power solution to the world.
So tell me then about the difference that this project, the one we see behind you, will actually make. You know, not so much, I don't want to hear about, you know, the wattage it puts out and things like that. I want to know the real impact it will have on real people, particularly because of the way the energy grid has struggled in Africa.
Yeah, let me focus on two aspects, two dimensions of how this project is bringing about a huge change, not only to South Africa, but across the entire African continent. The first one is in terms of dispatchable power. Solar energy, this is one of the first times, is being used as a baseload power. What that means is, when you come and visit the plant, you will see that this plant is generating electricity on a 24/7 basis. It not only produces electricity during the daytime when the sun is up and shining bright, like today, but it has storage. It has huge amount of storage, 9.3 hours of storage, which has been built through the molten salt system that helps us to dispatch electricity even during the late evenings, during the night, and the wee hours of the morning when the sun is not up and bright and shining. So that's one of the important aspects through which this project is creating a huge change in the world, not only just in South Africa. The second aspect is in terms of the community development, the community engagement. This project relies a lot on engaging the community around it. The operations of this plant is largely being done by people who live in the vicinity, in the community around this. The plant was built largely with a lot of labor force that was also used locally. So you see that this plant has a very strong social community engagement.
I just want to ask you one final question, and it's more of a holistic one to do with solar energy as a whole. You know, to me, it would just make sense that when you build a new house or a building pretty much anywhere in the world, you should make solar energy a central part of that construction. Do that, and there'll be a huge energy impact exponentially, I would think, over the years with the more and more places that are built. That just makes sense to me, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think solar industry, solar power is going to be part of the mainstream of construction industry going forward. Today, as you can already see, that with the successful build of this plant and the commercial generation of electricity, solar power is clearly demonstrated to be a successful force. Therefore, you will see a lot more of construction of solar power, particularly concentrated solar power, which is dispatchable power and is available round the clock, not just when the sun shines, because of the evolution of storage, to become a very important part of the construction industry going forward.
Ranjit Nanda from Aqua Power talking solar with us this week. Thank you, Ranjit. Let's head to the heart of South America now and take a look at Paraguay. Not somewhere you hear a lot about, but geographically it is located in a rapidly changing part of the world. In short, it's all about agriculture in Paraguay. Only a population of 6.5 million people, and as a landlocked country, it's hugely dependent on neighbouring export markets in Brazil, Argentina and Bolivia. However, it is still the 4th largest soy exporter in the world and the 8th largest beef exporter. 77% of its arable land is controlled by just 1% of the nation's landowners, though, so as a result, land disputes are common. Well, Paraguay's Foreign Minister Eladio Loizaga visited us here in Doha recently. We began by talking about his country's position economically and socially in the grand scheme of Latin America.
Thank you for being in Jazeera. It's a pleasure to me. Also, I am very happy to be in Doha. It's my 3rd time, but it's the first time as Foreign Minister. And as you mentioned, Paraguay is the undiscovered country in the south. It's small if you compare with Brazil and Argentina. While comparing with Germany, we are the same a quantity of extension, you know. But economically, we are doing well, even though Argentina and Brazil are having problems. You know, we are part of Mercosur. Mercosur is the southern common market of Paraguay, Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay, plus Venezuela. But Paraguay is doing well in the macroeconomics since about 10 years ago. We just finished last week the IMF visit regarding the Article 4, where they review the whole economy, and they conclude that the macroeconomy of Paraguay is very well, is very strong, and the forecast for Paraguay to grow this year is about 3.1%.
Okay, so how do you manage that? How do you keep your level strong when all else around you is having troubles? No, I mean, there's still good growth in Latin America, of course, but it's definitely slowing down as well.
Yes, of course, slowing down because Paraguay is a main producer of food, you know, especially commodities. But on the other hand,
soybeans, I believe.
Soybean and beef.
And beef.
We are the 5th exporter in the world of beef and the 4th exporter of soybean. But apart of that, we are working and we are investing a really high amount of money in infrastructure. That will give Paraguay a new kind of interconnection, not only inside the country, but also with our neighbor. And probably you know that we are a landlocked country. We don't have any meter of sea coast, but that disadvantage we are moving into some advantage because Paraguay will be the main road to the transocean road between the Pacific and the Atlantic. Must go through Paraguay and will be in Chile. The end will be in Antofagasta, and to the other side in the Atlantic will be Santos, Brazil. And we are working with the Brazilian, we are working with the Chilean, we are working with the Argentinian in trying to finish this road as soon as possible.
Do you feel that they appreciate your position, that you are actually quite, even for your size, quite an important player, particularly between those two areas?
Yes, you know, it's not easy, huh?
Yeah.
But Paraguay is doing economically have a law that obliges the government to have a fiscal responsibility, and that doesn't permit that we have to go over what the annual budget is approved by the Congress. And we must have a maximum deficit of 1.5% of the GDP, no more than that.
Finally this week, the search is on across Africa to find and nurture the brightest minds on the continent. And why not, indeed? The phrase African solutions for African problems has long been touted, but not necessarily realised. So this is part of a drive to find new ways of bridging the development gap between Africa and the rest of the world. Nicholas Huck has this report from Dakar in Senegal.
Mustafa Fall sees the world in numbers. He believes everything from the universe to the decisions fishermen take out in the ocean have an equation. Fall is the son of a Senegalese peanut farmer and an Einstein Fellow, one of the brightest mathematicians on the African continent.
What inspired me about Einstein was his ability to re-question everything, to try to have another way of looking at everything. Try not to say, okay, there is a universal truth, in a sense.
Fall works at the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences. Top academics, including Nobel laureates, teach African students who can't afford to go to MIT or Harvard, but are just as bright. Like Sol Paul Pire, he grew up in a remote village in Zambia. With barely enough to eat and no electricity at home, Sol spent his childhood hungry, staring at the sky. He now studies cosmology.
Believe you me, we are going to invent a lot of things, and yes, more of Einstein. And the next Einstein, I believe, is going to come from here. Even me, I share that idea. Just wait and see.
The African academics behind the school have started the next Einstein Forum, a fellowship for Africa's bright young minds whose work are too often neglected but need to be highlighted.
Organizers of this forum seek to address what it calls research discrimination. They say there's much African research with plenty of findings, but the work is often undervalued and overlooked just because it comes from the continent.
17 Einstein Fellows, as well as young researchers from across the continent, are sharing their innovations with top policymakers, business leaders, and academics.
It's something the world of aid has totally overlooked. You know, $1 trillion has been spent over the last few decades in aid to Africa. Almost none of it on generating expertise in Africa to design and implement its own solutions. And we've seen the consequence. Solutions from outside don't work.
For Fall, being an Einstein Fellow is an opportunity of being part of something bigger. He hopes his mathematical skills may someday unlock some of the deepest mysteries of this world and its untapped resources.
And that was our show for this week. There's more for you online, though, at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page with individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet me at KamalAJE. Do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or just drop us an email. Counting the Cost at aljazeera.net is the address. That's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.